Hello and welcome to the Hooded Horse Publisher Showcase at PAX West 2022. Hooded Horse is a publisher focused on indie strategy games, and we're here to spend the next hour not only showing footage and trailers from all of our games, but also having a simple conversation about where strategy gaming is headed in general. I'm Anthony Floyd. In addition to working at Hooded Horse, I'm also a strategy game YouTuber, HForHavoc, and I'm here with Tim Bender, our CEO and founder at Hooded Horse. Tim, shall we get started?
Yep, let's go.
All right. Let's begin with the trailer from our historical RTS and city builder game, Manor Lords, developed by Slavic Magic.
And so this is Manor Lords, and as the title says, this is a combination of medieval city building and real-time strategy. And you know, we've got the title there for this section of the future of RTS, and it's no accident that we start with Manor Lords, because we really do believe that this is a game that has the potential to take the genre in that direction. And yeah, I mean it's and of course we never want to say future of RTS in the sense this is the only, but it's definitely something that I think we're going to see more of, and in particular that combination of city building elements linked back with RTS. And this goes back to the origins of RTS games and city builders, because of course, although they're separate genres now, if we go back far enough, these were essentially the same genre.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my first strategy games ever was Caesar 3 Pharaoh, the Impressions game series. So city builders and RTSs are just built into my blood. Hence half the reason why I started my channel in the first place. But yeah, this is really taking it to a different evolution that we haven't really seen before.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game, and we should say this is the work of a solo developer. Yep, that's Slavic Magic. He is a solo developer, and and he has made something that is quite wonderful and is almost unbelievable in how good it looks and how interesting the gameplay is promised from it.
For sure, yeah. I mean, the graphics upgrades are something that you would expect from, an RPG title, and especially in like this first-person view. But the fact that we're here and it's an RTS game where we're going to be able to zoom out really far and also zoom back in is just really incredible. The scale on it is just unbelievable.
Yes, and the ability to fight battles, to raise. I mean, I think this is the sort of, I don't know. I liked playing this series of ancient games called Lords of the Realm, which I imagine you probably played too. But
yes, very early.
Yeah, but this idea of being a medieval lord and sort of, both having to manage the economic elements of things, raise sheep, take care of your people, develop your town, and then also confront the military matters and such. I mean, I think this is one of the core sort of things that strategy gamers find interesting. Let's step back into the medieval past.
Yeah, absolutely. And just you with this game especially, you're tied so close to it because your army is comprised of your own people. It's not just some arbitrary random population. So when you lose people in battles, you're losing jobs. It has a much deeper impact than what we're even used to with old school RTS city builders. And I think that just adds that layer that we as kids grew up in as adults now that we really need to satiate our strategy city building wants.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could see there from the units lining up where they've, sort of raised the, I guess the levy here to defend the place. It's, these are, there's more, there's, it looks like a battle's about to start. So we're at the right time to talk about this. But yeah, and there's, one of the most interesting things about this game is the focus on historical realism, and there's a lot of effort made to in the buildings and the design, how things work to reflect that.
Yep, absolutely. I think that again, that's kind of an aspect that we need as grown up in the genre. So I think it's pretty crucial.
Yeah, I mean it's an amazing game, and again, going to the future of RTS title, which we almost use a little joke among ourselves because everyone's always declaring futures of genres, right? But we do think that this has the potential to be part of where RTS is headed. That is to say, it's not going to be all of it. There's going to be a lot of RTSs that continue in all sorts of wonderful directions, but part of it is going to be going to these base building and city building elements, and And also, oh, well, here we go. So now we've now gone into a very different theme, space instead of medieval historical, but essentially the same union, the same return of RTS going back to those base building, city building elements here in Falling Frontier.
Yep. Yeah, so I think one of the things that I really like about this is it really does blend that aspect of base building and city building. It's not a true city builder because you're not building a city, you're building bases, but the logistical side of Falling Frontier is more city building, and that, even like old school base builders like Command and Conquer, you have a single resource or you only have one method. Here, if your logistics fail, your bases fail, your cities in essence fail, and it's super crucial, but it's also incredibly unique, which is a large part of why we decided to hop on for this one.
Yeah, and the other element that you were mentioning in Manor Lords being so attractive in that the combat not just being sort of meaningless units, but actually having an impact on things. That's very true of Falling Frontier as well. This isn't a game where you have 1,000 spaceships that you select all and then send them into one place and it gets blown up. This is a game where each spaceship matters, and we can see here there's spaceship design, and smaller flotillas of 4 ships or 6 ships maybe at the biggest. Flotillas, not fleets, is a distinction the developer likes to draw.
Exactly.
Yep, because it's smaller scale, and in fact each of these ships has its own command crew with names. It's not even just the ship itself is unique, it's that it's actually crewed by several officers who have names, who have ranks, who have portraits, who have special abilities, who mean something to you.
Right. Each one of your crew members is, I think, costs 1,000 people within the game. So if you lose a ship that has 12 crew members, you've lost 12,000 of your population. And from an early game standpoint, that's a pretty massive loss that you're going to be at a disadvantage of, because then your ships aren't going to be as efficient. Your population generates tax. You're going to be having less income, that sort of stuff. So yeah, absolutely. It just has more impact. And I think that's one of the things that the future of RTS needs, is game mechanics that just have more impacts, where if you mess up, it hurts more. And I think that's definitely what we see with Manor Lords and with Falling Frontier especially.
Yeah, and the victories and where you succeed also having greater meaning to you, because it's not just here I conquered this generic territory, defeat a generic enemy. It's if you defeat an enemy fleet in Falling Frontier, you can capture their ships, you can capture their officers and interrogate them. You can potentially learn valuable intelligence that helps you win the war. And as you expand across this the geography of these solar systems, and that's what it really is there's another aspect to all of this. When we talk about sort of making things meaningful by zooming in a way, we come to a particular aspect of games like these, and that is that it's and it is, this isn't a game on an intergalactic scale where you have many stars like many space games are. This is a game where you're playing in a solar system. It's zoomed in compared to most. And this connects up with the idea of hard sci-fi and how hard science fiction, science fiction that is more grounded, that sticks a little bit closer to speculations about what the future might bring. How this is interesting, it's interesting to broader population in works like the Three-Body Problem or The Expanse, and how that's coming into gaming now, especially with indie developers who are, as usual, ahead of the trend, because they see that the old, if older strategy games were inspired by Star Wars and Star Trek, we're starting to see games inspired by a very different kind of science fiction. And it's more zoomed in a way, and it's more it's more grounded. And when you've got a solar system, when you're in Falling Frontier, hiding a ship in its heat signature in a gas giant, or hiding behind a moon, it becomes more meaningful. The asteroids are meaningful. Every bit of by zooming in, every little bit becomes more meaningful. And I guess we're about to see asteroids being meaningful in a different game here.
In a very different game.
Yes. So this is, but with a similar focus, because this is Nebulous Fleet Command, which is a game, another of the indie games that we're publishing, that is an RTS and is a space battle game. And it is also a game, just like Falling Frontier, that's very influenced by hard science fiction.
Absolutely. And I think kind of to lend into this, that what you're even looking at right now is you're giving individual commands to these ships. You're in many ways, the information that you have, especially in Nebulous Fleet Command, you're able to control every aspect of that. And you can't necessarily do that with older style space RTS games. It's just like, hey, like you said, you drag across your whole fleet and hit click over there and they do it. No, here you're operating on the X, Y, and Z planes. You are having to take physics into effect, so you can't just whip your ship around. If you don't have the right type of radar, you can't physically see the ship on the X, Y, and Z planes. And then you also have all those systems. Your ship gets hit, and you've got to figure out how to prioritize certain areas of the ship to make it more effective. And I think having that localized effect, this is almost on the par of like a simulation game. In a way, but it just makes it more, I won't say, I guess the curve is a lot higher, but it also just makes it more interesting. Like it just does. And even in here, like we've talked about with Manalords and Falling Frontier, you lose a ship here, it's not like, okay, well, I'll just go back to my base and click and get a new one in 10 seconds. Your ship's out for the count, and that's just how it is. And you have to live with that repercussion.
And it's even to even to the level of missiles. You have a limited number of missiles, and these are costly things. And what players do with this game is quite amazing. I mean, they do things like, I guess, they hide behind asteroids. They missile batteries come out of nowhere to wipe you out. I mean, it's a very interesting multiplayer scene of players who are just dedicated to mastering this game. And just came out with a new update. It's in a game that's currently in EA, out on Steam right now, with just its first big EA content expansion, the Modular Missiles update, which took an already complex, sophisticated simulation of missiles and just made it so much more interesting and detailed. I like it. It's cool to see the evolution of even early access games, which just what community feedback can really do. It brought about this whole missile update system. I mean, even to the point where you can design your own missiles, like 5 or 6 different aspects, and how that's going to be hardcore into how people develop and how they play and develop their own strategies, which is just awesome to see. Yeah, and now we're coming to a third game. We clearly love hard science fiction here.
Clearly we do.
Yes, because we've got a third game there, Terra Invicta. And if Nebulous Fleet Command is sort of like the Expanse combat in space, Terra Invicta is a bit like the story. It's a bit like the early space colonization, all that, the building aspects, that same look at basically a much earlier period in history. So this isn't a game. Well, you can sort of see from the scenes here, like you're on Earth initially, and you're dealing with all of the modern Earth, nations and politics and everything, and you're then expanding into the solar system, and you're building space stations, and you're colonizing Mars, and you're doing these first steps into humanity's expansion of the solar system in a map where everything is, all the planets and moons and asteroids, they're all circling, they're all moving. It's actually a changing map, which is kind of an amazing thing.
Yeah, and I mean, here you're not just base building, you're not just expanding. Like you said, there's that geopolitical aspect. So you are trying, to either convince people to see your side in this aspect of either, depending on the faction, repelling the aliens, or convincing people to be okay with the aliens being there. So there's just that extra level of depth of what do I prioritize? How do I convince people or use certain actions to do that? And it's just really cool to see. Like I just love Terra Invicta and all the different mechanics coming together for it.
Yeah, and this section we're going to be talking a bit about nostalgia in gaming, and of course the first thing people think about when they look at Terra Invicta is of course the thematic connection to games involving alien invasion like XCOM, because it is a game where you pick one of 7 human factions that have very different responses to and attitudes towards an alien invasion, and lead them on to this early space exploration and doing whatever it is they want to do with the alien invasion, helping it if they worship them, destroying all the aliens, exterminating them if that's their motivation, seeking an alliance, seeking to profit, seeking to build a spaceship and escape. There's as many different responses as you can imagine, and all competing for how to deal with that. But the other connection, of course, to this game is a game that many of us loved and played called Alpha Centauri. In terms of thematic inspiration, where there was also 7 factions, and they were dealing with a different circumstance. But the beautiful thing about Alpha Centauri that I think Terra Invicta tries to capture is the idea how a game can be so much more replayable and so much more interesting when you've got fundamentally different. It's not just like, oh, pick a faction and you've got this bonus or that bonus, but it's rather pick a faction and everything's different. You approach the world a different way. You're aimed at achieving different things. And this is something that is, that is one of the reasons I think that we all still remember Alpha Centauri do. And, here we've got, Project Exodus and all of that. Each of these different groups has an argument to it too, to what they think they want to do in response.
Yep. They've got all their own influences, their own things and objectives, and it goes beyond, like you said, just your typical, okay, well, this faction gets this 10% bonus. It's so much more beyond that.
And, now, if we're going to talk about, games people are nostalgic for, I think the God game genre.
Man.
Yeah, populous, black and white. These God games that, it really, I loved as a kid. I think you did too as well.
Yeah, Black and White 2 was one of my favorite RTS games that I think I played the longest, because it was just so fun, and then it just disappeared, and the whole genre just kind of went moot for 10, 15 years. Which is real sad to see.
But now again, with indie developers, and this is sort of a reoccurring theme, is indie developers sort of being where players want to be. I think is that what we have is the game Fata Deum, the one we're seeing now, which is just a fascinating look. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be Black and White 3, right? It's clearly inspired by it. It's clearly inspired by Populous. It's clearly, but it's its own entry into the God game genre.
Absolutely.
But it's attempting to capture what is great about God games and give players a chance to, once again, step into the role and decide, what kind of God do you want to be? Do you want to be a benevolent one, an aggressive one? There's different ways. It's not even just evil and good. There's essentially 4 different ways we can be, and here we're taking a tour of the different resulting worlds that you create through your actions, and what kind of God you're going to be.
And it's that idea of taking direct control again. I know that's the whole appeal of Black and White 2 and Populous, is that you have direct control of each individual, if you want to look at it that. And then again, expanding upon it, like we've been talking about, going just a little bit deeper. Instead of just being good or just being evil, you have different passions, you have different aspects that go beyond just simple quote unquote black and white. The demo is great. I really love playing the demo. The idea that you can fulfill dreams to inspire your people and do stuff. Just the influences go beyond what we are traditionally seen with the God game genre, and I'm really glad that it's kind of making a return.
Yeah, it's something that we were talking about RTS and their origins before. God games had their origins back there with the city builders and RTSs too, and I think we're this we call it nostalgia, but it's also a recognition that there were some really interesting gameplay experiences that these games provided, and very interesting choices, which I guess now we're seeing Conquer, Convince. There's Frighten. What kind of God are you?
It's just so much more than what it used to be, and so it's beyond nostalgia, like you said. It's almost like a renaissance in a way. Like it's looking to the past, but also innovating, and it's not staying in the past, but progressing forward on top of it while honoring the past, I guess you could say, for sure.
And now we've got this game is Sons of Valhalla, which is just I think one cannot look at this game but feel a connection to. The pixel art games always have a little bit of that, I think, in their yeah, they're coming back to, you know, our times on the SNES or such. But this one is, like you mentioned, it has the nostalgic, it satisfies that in a way, but it's also so much more. It's offering so many more options, and we're seeing that now because you're going in, and you know, to be clear, this is a strategy game. You are,
sure.
we see him leading his little army of men. We see him making decisions. We see he's going to be building up a town.
Yep.
He's going to be attacking towns. He's going to be taking out fortifications. He's also going to be building them himself. He's going to be recruiting his army of soldiers. It's a strategy. There's really, you know, it's hard to find a direct comparison for it with the especially with the action elements, because also alongside all of this, you know, of course, you're swinging your sword.
Yeah, it's a 2D side scroller RPG strategy game. It hits so many things in great ways. Like, if you want to focus on base building, you can. You know, obviously you're going to need to integrate the tactics side of it. But having played this demo as well, there are tactics to it. It's not just a hack and slash. Like, you will die if you think you can take on 30 people. Like, you need people. You need to use different types of units. It really does blend that idea of strategy with that Souls-like, with that RPG style of, this actually has a pretty decent narrated story, you know, to it. And there's a whole different levels to it and whole different perspectives. And it's just really, really interesting to see that combination come to light and look as good as it does in a 2D side scroller.
Yeah, and taking that, you know, what you mentioned, it being, you know, having the RPG elements alongside the strategy. I mean, that's one thing that really drew us to this game, and it's drawn us to a lot of the games, is that they're not just trying to do one thing. They're looking to, and it's not as simple as just like, you know, add this element for him. No, it's more like, let's look at multiple genres and let's see how these can be mixed in. And Sons of Valhalla really is one of the things. The reason it's so interesting is it didn't have a clear sense of, okay, well, let's be an RPG or let's be a strategy game. It was, you know, let's do an RPG from a strategy perspective. Let's, you know, give you some real base building, interesting strategy elements and raising troops and tactics into this RPG experience.
And it's all, I mean, it hits that base builder idea too. I mean, you're collecting a set of 4 different resources, you're managing those, you're managing your army, you have upgrades that you can acquire both for yourself and for your bases. You know, it's not just a simple, like you said, like a little hack and slash. There's just so much more to it. You're gonna have to figure out how to siege these forts, and eventually those forts get stronger. So you're managing your army while also figuring out how to take on these towns, while at the same time the enemy's doing the same thing for you. And it's just a really unique blend for sure.
Yeah, and you know, you know, I have a special appreciation for Viking games. This is, you know, short personal aside. But the way back before I was, you know, involved in the game industry directly, I created a mod for a Viking game, which was. Which was actually, you know, caused by my wife. She was very interested. She studied Viking Age archaeology in college. Nice. Yeah, she did a dig. I don't think for everyone listening, Anthony does know my wife, but I don't think she knows this about her.
No.
Which is that she studied Viking Age archaeology and did a dig in Denmark. So
that's very cool.
The Viking theme has a lot of, and then now we're on to another theme that I absolutely love personally, is the Neolithic theme, the sort of really early history. And this is another game. This is the Way of Wrath. And this is another game that is RPG from a strategy perspective.
100%.
Yeah, and it's really kind of a fascinating approach to it as well, because in the Way of Wrath, you have a limited number of days. You're a tribal chieftain, and you have different origin stories, so you can pick what you want from there. And there's a bit of nostalgia there too, inspiration from things like Dragon Age Origins and such.
Right.
But you're a tribal chieftain, and you have a number of days to prepare for an enemy that's going to come and attack your people. And you have to decide how to spend those days and what to do to prepare. Do you raid enemy camps? Do you try to ally with neighboring tribes? Do you recruit people? Do you build up your own fort? Do you gather resources? There's all these choices. And, you know, in this, and, you know, it even goes to the level of tracking your decisions as chieftain on matters of justice to see what sort of a chieftain you are, what kind of precedent you're setting. So it's sort of this this combination of this role-playing experience for tribal chieftain, but also this strategic perspective of it.
Yeah, and we don't have too many games in the Neolithic that tackle more of the strategy side lately, but especially the RPG side. You know, there's not a whole lot that really gives you that perspective. It is a lot more tribal in this sense. There's that tribal aspect, and then having your characters that you choose to bring on affects everything around you. And it's a very unique blend. You know, it's the same blend as Sons of Valhalla, but it approaches it in such a different way. Again, that's why we decided to take it on, because of how unique it really was.
Yeah, and that charging bear, he absolutely charmed me. That was a huge part of the decision there.
Yeah.
It's like, I love bears. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, shoot.
And then, well, now I think we're reversing it, because now we're looking at basically strategy games from an RPG perspective, which is, you know, blending the elements but from a different direction. And this is Old World by Mohawk Games. And designed by Soren Johnson, who was the lead designer of Civilization 4. And it is, you know, it takes the 4X, you know, expand, exploit, exterminate, and such genre of games that, you know, games like Civilization are in, and then it brings in RPG elements by basically saying, okay, you're not just, you know, some immortal godlike ruler who exists outside of everything. You're a person in this world.
Yep.
And, you know, we see there in the you know, you're Romulus there in right, and you're this person, and you're going to eventually you're going to die. So, you know, you've got to marry, you've got to have heirs, you've got to watch out for what's happening, you've got to keep yourself alive through personal politics, you've got to deal with the personal politics of your heart, you've got to make decisions, you know, in these many very narrative events inspired by history and mythology and such that affect the other people in your court and yourself. As you basically play a strategy game from the perspective of a person rather than just a civilization.
Yeah, and you interact with so many different types of characters. I mean, this goes beyond just a face. You know, each one of these people have traits. Your traits affect how you gather resources, how many orders you can give within a given turn. And then you have to, not only are you interacting, but you really need to try and foster your heir. You want to try and potentially please your wife, or you want to please other allies who are actual characters who will die themselves. And so if you treated an enemy or a, you know, potential ally's son unfairly when he comes to power, that may have repercussions for your own empire, which may inadvertently start a war you didn't even really think about, because that interaction is there. But that base is strategy, and having that RPG aspect blended in just brings it to a whole new elevation for it. Yeah,
and you know, one of the things you mentioned there, the limited orders, the order system, limited actions, which is sort of a broader perspective we've seen in some of the games. We talked about things zooming into a solar system. It limits you in ways, but it also expands the importance of things. You know, the order system, where you're, you know, if you're a young ruler, you just came to power, not many people respect you yet, you don't have as many orders. So you can't actually control your entire, you can't move armies all across the world, because you've got limited influence, limited ability. And so you've got to constantly think, and then that expands based on the respect people have for you and other factors. And, you know, when you're an older ruler and you know that the secession is coming, you know that your heir is going to have this issue where at the beginning he can't do quite as much. And it's constantly causing you to think about, what do you really need to do? Rather than just like, move every unit every turn. It's, what am I going to do in this turn? Which also helps with the late game slog a bit. You know, it makes it a more focused perspective. It's not that your empire gets bigger, bigger, bigger. You have just always endless more things to do per turn, to where eventually at the end you have no idea what you're going to be, you know, like, it's just like, okay, well, I got a couple hours, maybe I could play a turn.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but that's a good point. You know, it's as you get older, are you going to focus on waging a war, or do you use those orders to construct things, to kind of build things up, so that you know, your heir, once they take the throne, they don't have to focus so much on the economy, and then maybe they could focus on war? Or do you use all of your orders, conquer some cities, and then know that that will leave you to not have to worry about your army and whoever takes over and do all that stuff? The order system is really unique, and it also even plays into our next game here, Alliance of the Sacred Sons.
Yeah, so now we've stepped once again to space. We're bouncing around the common themes of strategy, historical, space, the back and forth. And Alliance of the Sacred Sons, it has that, again, that strategy from an RPG perspective, and it has it's almost drifts a little bit towards like a life simulation in some ways, because you're making decisions. Similarly, you have a limited number of things you can do per in Alliance of the Sacred Sons, and some of those things are: do you work yourself to death, or do you keep yourself healthy and do things to take care of yourself? And eventually you're going to die, though. Unlike in Old World, Alliance of Sacred Sons has this sort of life sim or almost roguelike element to it, in that basically when you die, the playthrough is over. So and you'll get it'll show you how you did, how'd you keep the empire up, and there is an ultimate goal to become immortal.
Right.
And it's quite hard to do that, but you could potentially do that. But short of achieving that, eventually you'll die, and then there'll be a rating on how you did. This is another of the sort of interesting things, is that it's fun in strategy games sometimes to start from the beginning and start very small and build everything yourself. But it's also sometimes fun to jump into an interesting situation that's already been generated new every time, so it's random and always interesting, and have to deal with it. And Alliance of Sacred Sons is that sort of a game. When you jump in, you're actually already crowned emperor. You jump in as your young self has been crowned emperor or empress, depending on what you play,
right.
And you're already the ruler. But the issue is that the rulers before you, you're sort of like historically, like when dynasties have their last emperor, you're like the last emperor, basically.
No,
you're
you are
set up to be, because you're going to, potentially, things haven't been going well. You didn't have very competent people before you, and the empire's been falling apart. People know, the other great noble houses, by and large, do not, like you, and by and large do not respect your rule very much. They may facially pay homage to you, but in the end, they're looking after their own interests. And you've now got, and I guess the other comparison, things like Game of Thrones or something, right?
Well, and it's like no pressure, but like if you die, then the galaxy goes into like a 3,000 year long civil war. So like, no pressure whatsoever. It's not just the fact you die, it's that like humanity ceases to exist. So,
Well, I mean, so you've got to basically get things as good as possible and as stable as possible, and do as much progress as possible as you can within your lifespan. And you do this by, playing politics and everything. And it's just a fascinating experience. And I think, and now we've gone to another one, which is another perspective, strategy from a roguelite perspective. This is Against the Storm, which is a city builder, but a roguelite city builder. In which you, rather than just building one city, building it to be absolutely massive, what you're doing is constructing repeated cities throughout the world in order to achieve various objectives that are given to you.
Yeah, so essentially you're a pioneer. You've been commanded by the Queen to go out and find these resources to help rebuild. And then, again, what you said, it's unique in that you're not building this huge city. Every time you go into a new town to start a new town, you have an entirely different experience from what I've seen. I mean, in my current playthrough, I built 5 cities, and I've tried to use a standard, and that standard just doesn't exist because the resources aren't the same, your populations aren't the same. You have 3 different species that all excel at a certain degree, so that influences. You have different orders that you can fulfill for the Queen, and that determines the direction that you go, the places that you develop, the tech that you decide to function with. And it creates an entirely new city building experience that I honestly didn't really imagine could be possible.
Yeah, it's definitely a game that's hard to find anything that too similar to it, because it's doing something just quite unique, and offering you that chance to keep responding to new environments and new challenges within new maps. And it's a really interesting take on bringing in that roguelite element, because it's build a city, we move on, build a city, move on, and with still having that sort of meta progression, because you're ultimately building up the scorched city, your capital, and with the resources and what you're able to achieve.
Well, and yeah, and then you're even interacting with all of those cities as well as you build your old or your new ones. So it just all comes together very, very well in Against the Storm. I love it.
Yeah, it's it's truly it's. I mean, that's the great thing about indie devs is that they see possibilities to create something different, and that's also true now as we go to one more of these blank from a blank perspective. Which is Capital Command, and Capital Command is a space sim and a space battle sim where you command a spaceship, but you're not a fighter craft. You're not a nimble ship darting in and out. It's from a strategy perspective. So what you are is a big, lumbering, bulky, hard to turn battleship that is going along as this massive thing, and you're thinking about how to fight that way. So when you've played games like, or when you've watched, I mean, this again, goes to sort of, it's not quite hard sci-fi. It goes to almost an earlier bit of science fiction, but things like Battlestar Galactica, right? This idea of, the giant battleship as being the major thing, or more recent hard science fiction type works, because this is actually also respecting physics in every way it can, possible. You have momentum. You have to deal with momentum. It's one of the reasons you're so bulky. The weapons are inspired by what would be thought to work. So we actually are going back to, we can't escape our love of hard sci-fi, even as we
can't. Nope.
nope. Step to another.
We never will.
No, well, yeah. So, well, I mean, we say that, and then we enter a game which I'm struggling to think of a way to call this. It's not so much art, but it's a very interesting science fiction game, which is that Mars Tactics. And Mars Tactics is, this is obviously a turn-based tactical game. So, it's, you position your troops, they get into cover, you command them. But it has a lot of things unique to it, and that's why we call this old genre new theme. For one thing, you blow everything up, blow up buildings, containers, like it's highly destructible. You call in, orbital strikes. You have an actual overworld map where you can do things like bring in other armies and position artillery, and you have a very interesting asymmetric gameplay. And this is sort of, a species of what we're talking about when it came with Terra Invicta and the different factions, is that in Mars Tactics, there are two factions that are play very much unlike each other, Capital and Labor. So it's all around a worker sort of revolution on Mars is the background. And if you pick Capital, then you're going to start out very, very powerful and with a lot of resources. But you're going to be beholden to your shareholders back on Earth. You pick Labor, you start out without those resources. You got to build yourselves up, but you can become very powerful in the end, and you don't have the shareholders to worry. And that little guy, every time that little guy gets hit and he falls off.
I love it. Taking out that stack of tires is fantastic.
And there we've got now, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set the motto there at the beginning of what is a spy game, a espionage grand strategy game called Espiocracy. And Espiocracy, as it's saying, you lead the intelligence agency of your choice, and it really means that you can pick the intelligence agency of any of the countries out there. It's huge choice, and you lead them at the end of from the end of World War II, all the way to basically the modern age, just before a couple of years ago, basically. So you lead it all the way into the modern age, and you're playing through the Cold War, the post-Cold War, all of these events from a perspective not of running the country, but of running the intelligence agency of a country. So you're not the big chief. There's the executive out there, and you've got to worry about that because he's setting policy. You're the guy running the CIA or or any of the intelligence agencies of the other countries. And it's changing. So at one moment you might be during the Cold War, that's what you're specifically fighting. If the Cold War ends, which could end in any number of ways, you're hunting spies and terrorists, and you're dealing with the changing world. And this is the kind of grand strategy game that when you look at it, it feels like something that you'd always wanted to play, but
you never knew was even possible. Like, it's not even a concept you thought about.
Well, I mean, there's been board games like this, right? There's been board game exploring the espionage things, but yeah, you're right. Never in a video game. So old genre, new theme. And we have another one right here, which is Clanfolk. And so Clanfolk, of course, is a colony sim. So, you look at it right away and you think of games like Prison Architect, RimWorld, Dwarf Fortress, and it bears a lot in common with games like that. But the focus of it, so the gameplay focus of it is fundamentally different. So unlike games like Dwarf Fortress and RimWorld, which heavily inspire it, the focus is not on raids and combat is the challenge. You're not worried about an invading army coming in. What you're doing is instead you're worried about survival against nature. It's a historical, it's set in a historical time, the Scottish Highlands. You're a poor family that starts there, and it's hard to survive your first winter. It's brutal. But once you do, and once you have that element of you're surviving its nature, the game is and that's the theme of it. We call this now keeping people alive. There's this charm in it. It's really not just the survival element of it, as in the challenge to survive winter. It's also the focus on the people and what it means, because it's not a game that wants inevitably to destroy what you've built, which nothing against those games. I love them. Dwarf Fortress is wonderful. Dwarf Fortress is eventually, the goal is sort of to end in chaos.
Right.
Clanfolk is more about once you're able to survive and get past that, it's about, what you're seeing there. It's about bathing the child. It's about raising the sheep. It's about watching.
It's a clan simulator almost. Like your purpose is to develop the family, and have marriages and develop bloodlines and do all that stuff. Like it's a life simulator in a different way than things like Prison Architect could ever be, or RimWorld or Dwarf Fortress or any of those.
Yeah, because it goes across those multiple generations. You'll have the babies get born. You'll dress them and wash them, and your people will take care of them and keep them alive, and they'll grow up and they'll grow old and they'll eventually pass away. After having passed on their knowledge to their grandchildren, which is, I think, what we're seeing right there is just the, clearly fire has taken over at this point, but which is a challenge there. But we're, it's the kind of game that actually, it's odd because you say it's very tough. As you say, it's very tough to survive winter. The survival element is very real. But once people get going, you see a lot of people talking about how they love this game to turn on after work. They find it relaxing. They go back to this family they're raising and just guiding them through to whatever end they want. You really can define your own goals in this game.
I think that's also very crucial in just about any strategy game nowadays as well.
Yeah, that sandbox element, of going beyond. Yeah, it really is. It really is quite an important element. Well, okay, so now we've got
a different keeping people alive.
Yes, very different. And again, we've jumped in our going from space down to the Earth and back and forth. We're now keeping them alive in space, and it's and this is Fragile Existence. And in Fragile Existence, this one, the immediate inspiration that one might think about is something like Battlestar Galactica.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in that humanity has been destroyed, Earth has been destroyed, and you take you are the commander of the last surviving fleet of the remnants of mankind, and you just take your fleet and you go. And you're trying to then survive the journey, which is tough because you've got to go into these unknown systems. You've got to try to find resources to keep people alive. You've got to deal with morale problems. You got to deal with keeping your fleet together, all of that human element to things. And all the time you're being pursued by the enemy that destroyed Earth, and they are relentless. And so you can't stay anywhere too long because, much like, again, it's that feeling of people who say watched a work like Battlestar Galactica and thought, I would really like to be Commander Adama and figure out how I'm gonna. I
like that stress.
Yeah, well, it's you just this struggle to lead this surviving fleet and keep them alive, and and knowing that there's an enemy on your tail, and we see there's both the space part of gameplay and there's the landing on planets, because you've got to land You've got to survive along the way. You can't just keep running. You'll run out of resources.
Right.
You've got to land on these planets. You've got to harvest what's there. You've got to explore. And you've got to, we see the little survivor count there. you've got to keep the fleet alive.
Yeah, and I think that balance is going to be what's really interesting about this game, is the balance between how long do you stay on a planet or how long do you stay in a system versus when do you jet? Do you choose a resource heavy system to kind of make a sort of last stand? Do you sacrifice a fleet, one of your fleets, to gain that extra time? You know, how do you survive, and in what manners, what strategy, what are you willing to do to keep the most people alive? Because it's not about keeping everyone alive. I think that's going to be unavoidable, but it's how do I keep the most people alive as we continue through until we come to a point where we could potentially fight this menace coming after us, or how do we escape 100% where they can't find us anymore? It's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and it's you know, the like the other games. So this is what's sort of amazing about indie games, is the ways in which indie developers think of you know, push the boundaries of what a game is exploring and come up with interesting ways to do that. Because when you think about it, and here we are, what makes indie games special? So what we have is, you look to something like Terra Invicta, right? I mean, one of the most interesting things about it is it's not just, oh, I'm a strategy game, here's a fixed map, I'm going to expand across the map. It's, you know, here's a moving solar system, here's our solar system, everything's moving. You might build a base on Mars and your enemy's on the moon of Jupiter, and where those two planets are in relation to each other is going to be constantly shifting,
right?
Because they're all circling. You know, Fragile Existence is, you know, you're not just expand across and paint a map. You're this ever-moving entity where you come into a system, you expand a bit, to gather what you need, and then you need to, you know, go again. It's not just map painting. Espiocracy, again, not you know, about painting the map. You're not, you know, controlling this. Yeah, you don't take control of a country like, I'm a conqueror. You're the head of intelligence agency. You're looking after your country's interests. You're trying to keep I mean, you're dealing with all sorts of, you know, issues, because you're dealing with things like nuclear proliferation. You're dealing with things like, you know, the end of colonialism and the old European empires falling apart. And how it's not about just like, okay, well, I'm just going to make some armies land and conquer everything. It's how do you deal with these really, really fascinating issues that are going on in these games? And, you know, that's what makes, you know, indie games so special, I think, is that they break new ground, and they break new ground for a number of reasons. I mean, one of them is that an indie game developer, generally speaking, isn't worried about the quarterly reports to the publicly traded company. They're not thinking about, well, in order to break even, I've got to sell 1 million copies. You know, so we better do something that we know everyone's going to like.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What they're doing is thinking like, let me create something that some people will love. And, you know, what's that some people? I mean, it could be a wide range of results and still end up okay, because in the end, if you create something that some people love, that's enough. An indie developer can create something and then be able to, you know, again, they don't have the 50-person teams, 100-person teams to deal with.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the largest part. It's the freedom aspect of indie games. You know, how many indie game stories do you hear? Well, in my spare time, I really wanted to make this, or, you know, I was this in my previous job, and I was like, well, you know what? I really want to follow my passion, and the passion is there, even if that passion takes 5, 6, 7 years. They have that ability to follow whatever lead they want to. They can switch a direction. And still be okay, because again, they're not having to meet that quarterly aspect. They don't have to pay attention to that most common denominator in a strategy gamer. Nebulous Fleet Command is an intense game. Like, it is intense. You're not going to casually stroll into Nebulous Fleet Command and just be able to excel and be really good at it. It takes time and dedication, and that's okay. You won't see that in a AAA game because it doesn't have that appeal. And so, yeah, I think those are one of the biggest appeals, in a sense, for indie games, and why I think a lot of people go for them so often.
Yeah, and we should stress here that, you know, it's not at all to say that indie developers don't face financial pressure, you know, because they face more financial pressure than anyone. It's just the answer to the financial pressure is a bit different. You know, if you've got to sell 1 million units, then what you've got to do is create the broadest possible thing that you know is going to work. But if what you've got to do is just, get to success that keeps going, your best bet, and nothing's a sure thing with indie games, of course, but your best bet is to create something that some amount of people love. And a lot of times, and what creates the best result, and what's true of probably, I think, pretty much every one of our developers, they're all creating the games that they love.
Absolutely. So yeah. No, that's absolutely crucial. It's yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. and I mean, and it shows through. I mean, there's just, there's such excitement in it. And one of the things that, makes it so fun to work in indie game publishing is you get to work with these amazing people who are 100%. Indie game developers.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an amazing group of people. And, and you get to see their excitement, you get to help a little bit. And, yeah, I mean, well, we mentioned financial pressure. I mean, and that's, the publishers, the quintessential useless middlemen inserting themselves in. But the way we justify our useless middleman stats and try to make it a mildly useful one,
right,
is to try to basically, well, what it essentially is it's, the indie game developers, that we work with, indie strategy game developers, they're creating something that they love and that people will love, and then our role is just to help them show it to the people.
That's right.
That will love it. And it's very gratifying in that sense. Even if I think all secretly in our hearts we wish we were making games ourselves.
Yes. Well, I mean, that's half the reason to join a publisher. As a YouTuber, I've been doing it for, I mean, goodness, 7 years at this point. I've helped with large games and small. I've worked with indie developers, just not even to make my own videos about it, but just to be like, hey, let me play this. I know the strategy genre. I know your niche. Let me play it and help you make a better game. Like, that's half the reason why I started a channel, was to be able to do that. So now working for a publisher and being able to contribute almost in a greater way often, beyond just gameplay, being able to help push their game out there is very gratifying. Like, it is 100% gratifying. And just working with these people on such an intimate scale is so fun. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I know the title is telling us it's, we got started a little early on what, because you brought it up there. I have to say that some of the, I mean, just truly some of the greatest people out there are the journalists and the YouTubers and Twitch streamers who cover indie games, because unlike us useless middlemen who we'll talk about how motivated we are and how beautiful it is a thing that we love to do what we're doing, but ultimately we're also getting paid at the end. But
exactly,
there's, and not to say that, I mean, obviously sometimes there is payment, but the vast majority of YouTubers who cover indie games, and I think this is right, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, most of the time when they're covering the small indie and discovering the small indie, those aren't the people, if they want the sponsorships and, to just make as much money as possible, they'll be mostly covering the bigger games, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
right. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's the motivation there is that, just the love of indie games and doing it, and that's also true for journalists who cover them. And it's not every journalist and not every YouTuber and Twitch streamer who really does makes the time to cover indie games in the way that some do, but the ones who do are absolutely wonderful, because without them, I mean, it'd be so much harder for these indie devs to get noticed. It'd be and succeed and get their games. People love them.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, we've seen it how one single video can vastly change the direction in just exposure alone. We've had that happen for a few games, or a single Twitch streamer who doesn't usually play this, but their longtime mods like, hey, you really need to try this game, and they try it out and end up loving it and stream it to a whole bunch of people that never anticipated. And yeah, it's the passion that's there. We work with a lot of YouTubers, and the response in just coordinating with them is they're excited like every time. And I can't tell you how many people that we've sent to being like, I don't know if they'll cover it. They respond back, it's like, you know what? I wasn't sure I was gonna like it, but I gave it a try anyways, and you've got a banger here. Like it's just really cool to work with the devs as a YouTuber, and then to be able to shift that as part of my job to then work with the YouTubers to see how that coordination happens. It's really unique, and it's one of the reasons why I joined Hooded Horse in the first place. So
yeah, well, we're glad to have you. So
Thank
it's
you.
so this maybe we should have titled this section, love letter to Twitch streamers, YouTubers, and journalists. But we well, okay, so yeah, it just really is true, because when you get down to it, I mean, heck, a lot of the games that we're publishing, we noticed because a YouTuber or Twitch streamer covered it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's quite wonderful, and I mean, and that's really the amazing. I mean, it's I think it's a common recognition among those who want to promote indies that there's just something special there in the developers, because the level of commitment, the level of love to it. I mean, these are. It goes beyond just a calculation of what they'll get out of it. Yeah, it goes to just they want to create this game. They want to introduce something new, and it's frankly, I mean, that's we talked about the not having the financial pressure, being able to try new things, but also why do they try new things? And I think it's because they love it too. I mean, that's the thing, is great developers are often creating the kind of games that they themselves want to play and want to see out there.
That's oftentimes the reason why they make it, because they want to try blending an RPG with a strategy aspect, or they want to really dig into simulation with strategy beyond what typical AAA games try and do. I think as a developer, they want to have the mechanics in the games that they've never played before, and so that's why they do it, because they want to see that come to life. And it's really made for some great relationships that we've had with all of our developers.
Yeah, I mean, it really is sort of a happy community, basically.
It is, yep.
Which is, I mean, they're all in the Slack channel together, and it's I mean, I guess what we do at Hooded Horse, I mean, when it really comes down to it, I mean, as self-deprecating as it is, I mean, we're the useless middleman who's trying not to be quite so useless.
Right.
We try to do something for them by getting their game shown, but ultimately, what we do at Hooded Horse is we do our best to take these wonderful creations that this, and it really is when someone trusts you with their creative work. When someone trusts you with something they're spending years of their life on, it's a special kind of trust, and just show it to the people who love it.
Yep. I agree.
And that's really just comes down to it. Do our best to show it, and through the help and the kindness of so many other people. Journalists and Twitch streamers and YouTubers who are just so kind as to look at these games, and players who share news of the games on things like Twitter and other social media outlets and Discord, and tell their friends and privately. I mean, it's just that's
what we're here for.
Yeah, I mean, we're basically relying on the kindness of so many people to help get word of these games out.
It's been a fun venture.
Yeah, yeah, and this is, I mean, here we're closing it off here pretty soon, so it's entering the time where this hour really felt like it flew by.
It did. It flew by a lot. Yeah, absolutely did. It was good. I love it. I love having these types of conversations, because they're so useful, I think, for everyone to see the back end of sort of things.
Really, it is about the games.
Yeah.
And it's and they're gorgeous. I mean, that's the thing, is it's
for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing what can be done. Falling Frontier, which we're seeing right now, just absolutely gorgeous game. So, well, thank you, everyone. It's been great talking to you, and both of us, all of us here at Hooded Horse, and all of the wonderful developers we work with, thank you for spending this time taking a look at the games.
100%. All the games are up on our Steam for wish listing, so highly recommend you go check them out. And thanks you for showing up to our publisher showcase for PAX West. I do appreciate it. Tim, thanks for hanging out with me for an hour.
Bye.
And we'll see you.